Hello, welcome to the Political Science Department's So You Want to Go to Law School workshop. My name is Mimi Glumack. I am an attorney and I am lecturer faculty in both the political science and in the criminal justice departments. If you want to know a little bit more about me, you can check out my profile on the political science faculty website. But just to give you a quick overview, I have a JD from the University of San Francisco sitting right there behind me. And I worked in both private practice, but also worked in the capacity as a staff attorney at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So all of that came after I finally got myself into law school and through law school. So I know that many of you are thinking about law school at this point and asking yourselves, what's the process of the application like? What do the schools look at? What is law school really like? So I put together this informational workshop to help you with that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll get started and we'll just work our way through the slides and I'll try to give you as much information as I possibly can about the process. All right, so here we are. So you think you want to go to law school. There are many reasons that you may want to go to law school, and there are many things that you are imagining you can do with a law degree. Here are just a few examples of the different types of law that you might be able to practice with a law degree. You can be an advertising lawyer, an appellate lawyer. You can work doing civil litigation in a medium or large or even small law firm. You could go into criminal law, whether it's in the defense side or it be public, defender's office or as a prosecutor. You could also work in environmental law or family law. You could work in human rights or civil rights, trying to vindicate the rights of others, intellectual property law, international law. You could also work as a judicial law clerk or, like I did, as a staff attorney for a large court like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. There are almost no limits to what you can do with a law degree when it comes to working with and around, the types of professions that involve the law. You can go into politics. You can teach like I am right now. So there is a really wide variety of what you can do with a law degree. Now, there are many reasons why you might want to go to law school. Some of those might include the fact that you're interested in legal, justice, economic, or social issues, and you see law school as an entree into accessing those. Similarly, you excel at logical thinking. It's your forte. It's something that you've always been good at. Or you enjoy learning from and communicating with others. But there's one piece of advice that I see over and over again that I was given over and over again as a young undergraduate, and that is that only go to law school if you are sure that it's the right decision. So if you think it's the right decision for you, we need to start talking about how do you begin the process of applying to law school. So one thing that I want to make sure we talk about, and I'm going to close my thumbnail right now so that I don't obscure any of the slide, is that about 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school is when you should begin the process. That's 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school, not before you intend to start your first semester of law school. So I want to make that very clear for everybody. So, for example, if you wish to attend law school in the fall of, let's say, 2023, then you should begin the process in approximately January of 2022. So this is part of the challenge that some students, sort of face is like, what's the timeline? How do I plan ahead? Well, here it is. I'm giving you the timeline. About 10 months before you go to submit your applications is when you should begin the process. You might ask yourself, well, why start so soon? There are a lot of reasons why we start so soon. Planning is the key to a successful application process. There is a lot of information to gather, transcripts, letters of recommendation, financial documents that you might need for financial aid purposes. Moreover, you have to study for and take and calendar the dates for your taking of certain required tests like the LSAT, which is something that everyone has to do. You have to research the location sites and figure out which prep courses you want to take. Next, you're going to have to sign up for certain organizational services, such as the Credential Assembly Service, and create an account at the LSAC, which is the Law School Admission Council website. We'll talk a little bit more about all of these in just a moment. Also, you have deadlines to meet, such as the LSAT test dates. When do you need to sign up for them? When should you take them, depending on when you plan to begin your application process? School applications, financial aid. So the bottom line is that if you start on the timeline that I'm giving you, which is about 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school, it will ensure a smoother process and avoid any unnecessary stress. Because let's be honest, it can be a little bit stressful to juggle all this information. Now, what are the steps of applying to law school? First and foremost, you want to try to apply for, meet with your pre-law advisor, okay? So you want to meet with your pre-law advisor as soon as possible. So ASAP or January of the year that you plan to apply. So January is about 10 months before you should be submitting your application so that you can go to school in the following year. As I said a moment ago, if you want to start in the fall of 2023, you should start your process in January of 2022. So first thing is meet with a pre-law advisor. Next, create your lsac.org account online. This is in January of your junior year, what we would consider your junior year. So it's still, the year before you go to law school. Next, begin preparing for the LSAT. So from January to March of your junior year, this is about 10 months to 7 months before you plan to submit your applications. You should start preparing for your LSAT. And you need to make sure that you understand that the LSAT is offered only 6 to 9 times per year. So it's not offered every month or multiple times every month. So you need to make sure you're aware of when that's happening. The next step is research the law schools. Which law schools are you interested in attending? And start doing some research in January or March of your junior year. Next, register to take the LSAT. You want to register in about April of your junior year. That doesn't mean you're going to take it then, but you need to register in about April of your junior year. Next is register for the Credential Assembly Service via your lsac.org account. That should happen in May of your junior year. And we'll talk about why we need to do all of these steps. Next, you want to take the LSAT. That's something that you want to take, in June or July before your senior year. It's actually the best thing you can do to sort of cross it off your list of things to do and to give yourself plenty of time to study. So June or July before your senior year, which is going to be about 3 to 4 months before you start submitting your applications, you want to take the LSAT so you can cross that off your list. Next, you want to start narrowing down the schools to which you apply. And that should be in about August of your senior year, so after you get your LSAT score back. Next, you want to gather and upload all the necessary materials for your application, and that should happen in about September of your senior year. And then finally, you want to start the process of applying to law schools. Now, irrespective of whatever deadlines are given by law schools, I highly recommend that you submit your applications to law schools between October and December of your senior year, even if the deadline is later. And we'll talk about why in just a moment. So make sure you're applying to law schools in October and December of your senior year. So think about it again. We talked about if you want to go to school in 2023, a fall, all of this that I'm talking about, the application process, should be taking place in October or December of, say, 2022. So again, you want to really get a good head start And again, we dial it all the way back to 10 months before you submit the applications. Number 10 on the list is you're actually now submitting the applications and applying to law school in December, between October and December of your senior year. All right. Now, let's talk about the first step in the process. About 10 months before you submit your application, so that's the January of the year that you are going to apply, meet with your pre-law advisor. It is never too early to talk to your department's pre-law or graduate school advisor. They can offer valuable information and they can give you a lot of assistance throughout the law school admissions process. You want to make sure you keep in touch with them. You make sure you want to give them as much information as they need to help direct you. But having somebody who's either been through the process themselves or who has done this multiple times, it's never too soon to start having a conversation with your pre-law advisor. Next, we're going to sort of talk a little bit about each of the components that I listed on the steps that you need to apply to law school. So next, in about January of the year that you're going to submit your applications, and about 10 months before your application submissions, you're going to create your lsac.org account online. LSAC stands for the Law School Admissions Council, and you are going to use this account over the next 10 months for absolutely everything. And that includes registering for law school, registering for the law school admissions test for the LSAT, uploading transcripts, uploading letters of recommendation, and even communicating requests to your instructors about where they can submit and upload the letters of recommendation. It will help you prepare applications. So the lsac.org is sort of the place where you need to create your account online as soon as possible. So whatever information you can start putting there, whether it's a resume or whether it's your personal statement, whatever the case is, you're going to be using this account over the next 10 months for just about everything. So the sooner you set it up, the better. The more effective you will be then in being able to gather and put whatever information you've gathered in a place where it's all sort of consolidated. Now, the next step in the process, in March of the year before you, or of the year when you submit your application, so that's about 8 months before you submit your applications, you are going to begin preparing for your LSAT. That's in January to March of your junior year. The LSAT is the law school admissions test. It's a standardized test that everyone who wants to go to law school must take it. There's no way around it. Now, what a lot of people talk about is LSAT scores, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but the LSAT is different than any other test you've ever taken, and it requires preparation and study and practice. It's made up of some types and forms and categories of questions that you may never have seen before on any of your undergraduate tests, including logical reasoning questions, logic games, reading comprehension. There's an experimental section, and then there's a writing sample section. The whole test takes about 3 hours in length, and each of these different sections that I just listed, except for the writing sample, has anywhere from 24 to 26 questions in each section. And again, it's different than any other test you've taken in undergrad, and it definitely requires preparation, study, practice, practice, practice. So in order to achieve your best result, you want to try to set aside at least 3 months to study for the LSAT test. Now, a few more words about the LSAT, about how to prepare for the LSAT. There are some common approaches that are utilized to study for the LSAT. The first one is to take a timed practice test. Now, you're going to see an asterisk next to certain words during this presentation. Those asterisks denote the fact that there are links available to these items that are going to be available on the Political Science website under the Student Resources tab. So when you're finished viewing this, if you want to take a look at some of the information that I've posted, you can take a look at a practice test, okay? Another thing that people will do is to order additional sample exams. The reason that one might take a timed practice test or order additional sample exams is because It will give you a taste of what these types of questions that you've never really seen before in any type of undergraduate exam are going to look like, and what it's like to take this type of exam with these types of questions in a timed framework, which is something that can be very challenging at first. And so you have to practice, and develop certain strategies, etc. So there are a few resources that I've provided for you on the political science website under the student resources tab, where you can click on the links and take a timed practice test and order some additional sample exams to help you prepare. Another approach is to order LSAT prep books. There are hundreds of options. Each of them is going to be a bit different, but most include sample questions and strategies for each type of question. And when I say strategies, it's guidance on how to try to work out the answer, guidance on what you should do if you're really stuck, so on and so forth. So there are a huge myriad of options out there. Some of them better than others, but there are lots of options from which to choose in terms of ordering LSAT prep books if you want to do it independently. If you have the financial means, and this is by no means a requirement, but if you have the financial means or can obtain the funding to enroll yourself in an actual LSAT prep course or hire a tutor, I highly recommend you do so. I have resources available for you also on the Political Science Student Resources tab with a link to, for example, one of the most well-known test prep organizations called Kaplan. And you can take a look there at some of the different options that are available for you to attend prep courses through Kaplan, or some, there's all kinds of other prep courses. Kaplan has been around, for example, for the longest time, and they have probably some of the best preparatory materials. So again, not necessary, but if possible, I highly suggest enrolling in an LSAT prep course or hiring an LSAT tutor. That will put you in the best possible place to make sure that you are as well prepared as you can be to take the LSAT when the time comes. All right, now, what's the next step? Around the same time that you're doing this sort of prepping for the LSAT and sort of figuring things out about when you want to take the LSAT and all of that, you need to start researching law schools. So about, 8 to 10 months before you submit your applications, you want to start researching law schools. So this is about, January through March of your junior year. It's important that you start your search early, and you want to start asking your questions. Where do you want to go to law school? This could be a question of geography. Where is it located? Do you want to stay close to home? Do you want to live in the Pacific Northwest, which is something you've always wanted to do? Do you want to go live, on the East Coast and get the heck out of town? It really depends where you want to go to law school, which can be a question that you have to answer both in terms of geography, where, and then also what type of institution. Do you want to go to an Ivy League college? Do you want to go to a state school? What kind of private school? What kind of school do you want to go to? And so this is where it's really important to do some research on law schools and really start helping yourself identify what you're aiming for. I suggest that you do some research by visiting a lot of different law school websites that you're interested in to gather some basic information like, what are their admissions requirements? What are the application deadlines? What is the tuition cost? What is student life like? What does this institution stand for in terms of the place that they hold in social justice work, et cetera? They have lots of great clinics for that kind of work. Do they have a lot of great outreach programs? Do as much investigation as you can by taking full advantage of the law school website itself to gather some basic information. And then I say, do your homework. Go beyond just the basic superficial landing website and really drill down and dig deep into some of the information that's available to you on these websites. For example, you can perhaps attend certain open houses, which may not be in person, but which may be available either virtually or through some sort of guided tour. Connect with current students. That's an option that you see available on a lot of law school websites, pages where people want to learn about that law school. You can connect with and find like a buddy and ask the questions of them directly. They have these sort of student ambassadors that will work with you to give you information about some of the questions you might have about the institution. Read whatever online material is available to you about the school's philosophy, where they stand on social justice issues, or their work in the community, or frequently asked questions that they provide answers to. And also view whatever informational videos. This is the age of the video, right? And doing these types of things by video. So avail yourself of whatever material they have available to you that will give you an even greater and deeper understanding of the institution that you're looking into. So that's what I mean by do your homework. Finally, and last but not least, is talk to people who went to law school. There's an incredible value in reaching out to people within your immediate family or extended family or your in-laws or your best friend's father or your best friend's aunt or whomever it is. Talk to people who went to law school. Ask them where they went to law school. What did they like about it? What did they not like about it? Are there law schools that they might recommend would be a good fit for you, especially people who might know you well could give you some feedback? So don't forget, some of the best resources that you have in helping research law schools are those people that surround you every day. And it could be someone like me, one of your teachers. It could be, your pre-law advisor. It could be some of your classmates. So talk to people who went to law school, talk to people who are planning to go to law school, just talk to people. All right. Now, all right, 7 months before you submit your applications, this is about April of your junior year, you're going to register to take the LSAT. All right, so register to take the LSAT in April of your junior year, and you can do this, as I mentioned before, through the account that you created on lsac.org. All right, that account and that landing page that account is going to help you do just about everything. You're going to spend tons of time there over these 10 months before you actually start submitting your applications. So you can register for the LSAT and look up the LSAT dates and all of that on the lsac.org website. Okay, so again, you want to register to take the LSAT in April of your junior year. As I mentioned earlier, the LSAT is offered multiple times every year. It can be offered up to 9 times per year at various testing centers throughout the entire country. The deadline to register for an LSAT exam or for an LSAT test is about 1 month before the test date. But you need to be cautious about this because space is limited and the registration fills up very, very quickly, especially around certain times of year, like the June and July testing timeframe. So as soon as you know you want to take the test, go ahead and get yourself registered, okay? But definitely at least in April of your junior year. So about 7 months before you plan to submit your applications, get yourself registered. Again, there are, a limited amount of times that it's offered, and there are testing centers throughout the country, but you want to try to get a jump on the registration. Don't wait until the last minute, because if you do, then the space in the locations that are closest to you could fill up. And you want to register as soon as possible so you avoid having to travel a long distance to take the exam, because it's stressful taking exams. And the last thing you want to do on top of already being stressed is have to deal with traffic and all the other crazy things that happen when you're traveling a long distance to take an exam. Okay, so make sure that you register in about April of the year before you submit your applications, as it's about 7 months before you submit your applications. The deadline to register is usually about a month before the test date, but don't wait. Get a jump and get registered early so that you don't end up driving all the way across your state just to take the test. All right. Now, about 6 months before you start submitting your applications, you should register for your credential assembly service. What is a credential assembly service? It's a particular service that's offered through your lsac.org account, And basically, this is what we call a sort of a clearinghouse for where you upload and assemble all of the critical information that you are going to need and material that you are going to need to submit with your law school applications. So you want to register for the Credential Assembly Service through your lsac.org account in May of your junior year, so about 6 months before you submit your application. The Credential Assembly Service is the gatekeeper between you and the law schools. All your information is gathered and housed in the CAS, and that's sort of the gatekeeper between you and what you send out to the law schools when you start sending out applications and submitting applications. You are going to submit all your application materials to the Credential Assembly Service, and then the Credential Assembly Service is going to verify and then submit the materials to each law school. So this is super important, that sort of verification process, because truthfully, most ABA approved schools are going to require that applicants use the CAS service because of that verification process that's built into the Credential Assembly Service with organizations like the lsac.org. So sign up for it in May, 6 months before you submit your applications. Know that it's the gatekeeper where you're going to upload all the materials that you're going to need to submit for your law school applications. And most ABA approved law schools require applicants to use the CAS. Now, the fee to use the CAS is about $195, but there are fee waivers available to many qualified applicants. So don't let that deter you. Make sure you get it done as soon as you can in May. All right. Next, big day, not the big day, big months, shall we say. Now it's finally time in June or July, about 4 or 5 months before you submit your applications to law school, it is finally time to take the LSAT. And the reason that we recommend, or I recommend, and most people recommend, taking the exam in June or July is because, number one, you can cross it off your list of things to do. It's one last thing to worry about during your senior year. If you take it during June or July, you will have had a number of months to prepare when you're not actually actively in school, which is the ideal, because we talked about setting aside 3 months to prepare. So you want to take the LSAT in June or July before your senior year. Cross it off your list of things to do, get it out of the way, and do it when you have had plenty of time to prepare. Now, some of you may already be signed up to take your LSAT in the upcoming months. So for those of you who are doing so, I have a couple of tips for those of you who are going to be taking the exam either in the next few months, or even those of you who are going to sign up for and take the exam in June or July, or at any time between now and when you submit your applications, okay? But there are some good tips for the day of the exam that I want to share with you, because everybody asks, what's it like? What's it like? What should I do in preparation? So here you go. Make sure you know what you need to bring on test day. If you need to bring your registration number for the LSAT exam, if you need to bring your school ID, if you need to bring a California identification card, whatever it is, make sure you know what you need to bring on test day and have it ready to go and assembled the night before. I know this goes without saying, but make sure you get a good night's sleep. Cramming the night before an exam never did anyone any good. So make sure that if you've been practicing and taking practice exams, that you knock off at a decent hour before the actual test and get a good night's sleep. Another admonition I will give you is be careful what you eat. And I know this sounds funny, but this is not the time to find out whether or not you're allergic to peanuts or strawberries or some unusual exotic food that you've never tried before. So have something tried and true. You don't want anything to upset literally you on the day that you're going to be taking an exam, because you want to be fully focused. For those of you that are going to be taking the exams in person, when they start opening the test centers again, I recommend that you dress in layers, because oftentimes the exams are given in large sort of warehouse-like environments or large classroom environments or large, facility convention meeting room types of environments, and it can get a little bit chilly, so make sure you dress in layers that you can peel off as needed. One other thing that I recommend is that make sure you know where you are going, where the test center is located, do your Waze or your Google Maps or whatever you need to do to figure out how long it's going to take you to get there on the days when there's traffic or when the days are not, there's no traffic, and make sure that you allow yourself plenty of time to get to the test center. I would even go so far as to say, make sure that you get to the testing center at least 30 minutes, if not 45 minutes before the actual exam begins. You need to account for the fact that you might get lost, that there's going to be traffic, that there could be accidents on the road. You never know what's going to happen. So make sure you allow yourself plenty of time to get to the test center. All right, now, 3 months before you start submitting your application, so this is about August before you begin your final senior year. About 3 months before you start submitting your applications, you are now going to start narrowing down the schools to which you want to apply, all right? And the reason that I ask you to do this in August, or suggest that you do this in August, about 3 months before you submit your applications, is because you are going to review the LSAT scores, which will be available to you about 3 weeks after you take the test. So if you took the test in June or July, then you will already have received your LSAT scores by August. So now you can begin the process of narrowing down the schools that you want to apply to. What you're going to do when you have your LSAT scores is compare your score to the average score for the schools that you want to attend. Every school and law school website is going to have information about what the applicants who apply and are admitted have in terms of GPAs and LSAT scores. I'm also going to give you a great resource in just a second to help you actually run it through an algorithm to give you even more guidance. So compare your score with the average score for schools that you want to attend, because not only is this going to help you narrow down the schools to which you should apply, but if you didn't do as well as you hoped on your LSAT, this will give you the opportunity to retake the LSAT again, if you wish, before you begin submitting your applications, or even right around the time you are submitting your applications. But one of the things I want to make sure that you're aware of, and we can talk about this again in a moment, is if you do retake the test, some schools will take your highest score, some will average them, and some will look at all of them. So just keep that in mind, and we'll talk about this again in just a moment. Now, based on your LSAT scores, you're going to start narrowing down the list of schools that you want to apply to. And that's going to be based on your LSAT score, your current GPA, even what you think your projected GPA might be on graduation. But you're going to have to submit some of your GPA documentation in the fall of your senior year. So the most current stuff you're going to have won't even include that fall score. So you want to start looking at where you stand in August in terms of GPA, LSAT score, all of that. The easiest way for you to start narrowing down schools is to plug in your numbers at the LSAC's official guide to ABA approved law schools link, which I provided for you on the Poli-Sci website under student resources. This will allow you to plug in your LSAT score and your GPA, and once it's run the algorithm, it'll give you an entire list of all the places where you could potentially apply. And then you can look at each of them individually. You can look at them by regions. You can figure out, by tuition. All those different things are available to you. But it will give you an indication of what the likelihood is and how many people who were admitted have scores that are similar to yours. What percentage of people had higher scores, whether it's the LSAT or GPAs, what had lower scores, etc. But it will show you where you fall in terms of your chances of submitting an application that could potentially be accepted. I will always issue the caveat, there are no guarantees. There's no guarantees for any of this, but it will at least help you in the process of narrowing down the schools to which you wish to submit applications. in October and December, in a few months after you start doing this research. Now, what I like to say about Hail Mary passes and everything in between, even if the schools that have popped up on the list once you run your numbers through the algorithm from the LSAC tool that I've given you here, don't discount the possibility of getting into some really great schools. I always call this your Hail Mary pass. Everybody should have a Hail Mary pass or a moonshot goal. If Harvard has been your dream, why not? Take a chance. You don't want to do too many of these because you don't want to be necessarily disappointed, but also they cost a lot of money sometimes, to put in multiple applications. So you want to be cognizant of that. But take a few chances and apply to a few of what I call your Hail Mary passes or your moonshot schools. And then you should have a good chunk of schools in the middle that are, what we call definite maybes. Those schools that you think you have a pretty darn good chance to get into based on your LSAT scores and your GPA. And then you should have a group of schools that are your for sures. Like everything that you have in terms of LSAT, your extracurriculars, your GPA, your letters of recommendation, everything should almost guarantee you a spot. Again, there are no guarantees for any of this, but I just want you to keep that in mind. So do not limit yourself solely because the algorithm said, hey, there's not a snowball's chance in hell. I say always try, always try. All right? All right. Next, let's talk now about, we're getting now down to the nitty gritty. We're kind of rolling up to the place now where you're going to start submitting your applications. So in September, about 2 months before you submit your applications, you need to gather and upload the necessary materials for your applications. All right? Most schools are going to require many pieces of information, and that includes an application form, an application fee, your resume, your personal statement, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, where you need to allow for multiple drafts and revisions, so don't get started too late on that. You're going to need at least 1 to 3 letters of recommendation. You're going to need your undergraduate transcripts, and you are going to need your LSAT score. So you need to gather and upload all the necessary materials for your applications that you have access to by September, which is 2 months before you begin submitting your application. So again, there's lots of moving parts here. It's a lot to gather, and some of these pieces are dependent on third parties, okay? So that's September, but I'll just give you a little caveat here is don't forget, even after you've submitted all of your applications, you can also submit your updated fall semester grades to your credential assembly service in the January after you've submitted your applications, which is the January of your senior year. And that's for the schools that require you to do so, and some of them do. So you want to do it just as make sure that you've covered all your bases. Now, here comes the big finale. In October, you want to start, or in October, about a month before you start submitting your applications, you want to begin applying to law schools, okay? So start applying. I mean, I know I say it's like a month before you submit your applications, because the rule of thumb for me when I was a young person, applying to law schools, is you wanted to get everything in no later than Thanksgiving, right? No later than Thanksgiving of your senior year. So that was my sort of rule of thumb. So we're talking about generally the same time frame. So about a month before you submit your applications, or even in October when you are going to start, doing your applications, you want to begin to apply to law schools using the credential assembly service. So start as early as you can in October and December of your senior year, even if the deadline is later. Why, you ask? Because most law schools start accepting applications between the end of August and the beginning of October. So they start accepting applications. And most schools don't stop accepting applications until sometime between February and June. Now, will you say, why am I getting started so early? Because almost all schools have what we call rolling admissions. Rolling admissions means that they will receive applications, they'll accept some students and will reject others. And it just keeps rolling forward and rolling forward and rolling forward. So they don't necessarily fill up all their spots right away. It keeps rolling, but it's to the benefit of the people who get their admissions or their applications in early, because there's a greater likelihood that if you qualify, you might be given a spot where that spot may not be available later on if for some reason, they admit a certain amount of people who have a certain GPA range or something like that. So remember, if you get in early, or at least if you apply early, you'll have your answer earlier as well. And that will also help you recalibrate if you need to submit some more applications later on. So again, make sure that you start submitting your applications in October and December of your senior year, even if the deadline for most schools is later. Most of them don't stop accepting applications until sometime between February and June, but the longer you wait, the less likelihood you have of maybe securing a spot if the rolling admissions have basically filled up every spot and there are only a few discrete ones left for certain students that meet certain requirements, okay? Now, another admonition I will give you is be sure that you check in with the schools that you have applied to make sure that they received all the necessary information for your application. And this is particularly important as pertains to information that is submitted by third parties, such as letters of recommendation and official transcripts. As I mentioned before, when you reach out to instructors and you want them to write you a letter of recommendation, they can submit it and upload it directly through the lsac.org. You will get a letter or an email rather from the lsac.org when something has been submitted by one of your professors or your instructors or whomever it is that's writing you a letter of recommendation. But you still want to make sure that the Credential Assembly Service had all the correct information gathered and that everything was sent to the schools to which you've applied and that they have all the information that they need so that your application doesn't get held up for some reason and you don't miss the opportunity to be part of this rolling admission process and get your foot in the door as soon as possible, if possible. All right, so be sure you always check in. All right, so everybody wants to know, what do law schools look for in an application? Well, let's talk about some critical components first. Your LSAT score is critical, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Your GPA is also critical. Those are two of the most important factors and pieces of information that a law school will look at in your application. Now let's talk about what's important. The rigor of undergraduate coursework, what you took and how you scored in those areas is important. Excellent reading and writing skills are also important, and that can be exemplified in some of the scores that you have on your LSAT, some of the undergraduate curricular work you did, any writing samples that you might decide to submit along with your application, as well as your own personal statement. Similarly, strong letters from people who know you really well are extremely important as well, especially from instructors and people who can speak to your academic abilities and achievements. In the good category is extracurricular involvement, volunteer work, externships, working on political campaigns, working for social justice endeavors, active on your campus, etc. Those are good. They're good. Absolutely something that will be taken into consideration. Not as critical as LSAT or GPA scores, but similarly, they will be looked at. Personal growth discussed in your personal statement is also good. And that's why I encourage my students to really start thinking about what you want the school to know about you when you submit your applications. And if you can find a way to describe your journey or the adversity that you've overcome to be where you are now at this point of applying to their law school, include that as best you can in your personal statement, and it'll show personal growth, which is something else that law schools look for in an application. Last but not least is demonstrated interest in the law school itself. What do I mean by this? See and be seen, people. Go to events, Make sure they know your name. If there's a mixer that you can go to, if it's someplace close by and we can go back to, in-person contact, by all means go, meet people, reach out to people, reach out to the coordinators at the law schools. If you demonstrate that you are really, really interested in going to that law school and they know your name, those are the types of little extras that can sometimes tip things over the edge. It doesn't necessarily make all the difference in the world. It certainly does not take precedent over an exceptional LSAT score or an extraordinary GPA, but demonstrated interest in the law school itself does count for something. All right. Now, let's talk about a few key necessary materials, and I'll just give you a little brief overview. Starting with letters of recommendation, I recommend that you obtain letters from people who know you well. Strong letters from people who know you well, who can speak to your personal character, your academic performance, your participation in community activities or in volunteer work or in some other types of organizations that are extracurricular. A lot of these should come, as best you're able to secure them, from the people that know you academically, your professors, and the professors perhaps who taught you law-based courses are great. But definitely strong letters from people who know you well are going to be the best types of letters of recommendation. Your mom and father not included, okay? Parents not included, grandparents not necessarily included. We need people who know you either in some sort of academic capacity or work capacity or volunteer work capacity or extracurricular activity capacity, but your priority is going to be people who know you academically. I suggest that you begin requesting these letters of recommendation about 2 to 3 months before you submit your applications. So think about getting this done in August or September of your senior year, so 2 to 3 months before you plan to submit your applications. And you want to ask for these letters from the instructors and professors with whom you've had multiple classes. That's always best because, like I said, they will know you better. But that doesn't exclude you from asking for a letter from a professor with whom you had a single class that you excelled in and you had a great rapport. But the one thing I will admonish you about is make sure that you always, always, always ask before you send a link to this instructor requesting a letter. Always ask permission first because you want to make sure that they're going to say yes. All right. Now, the next thing is your personal statement. Everybody asks me, oh my God, Professor Glumac, what do I do about my personal statement? What should I write? And here's the bottom line. The personal statement is a short essay in which you articulate who you are and why you want to go to law school. That is different for everybody, and that's why it's called a personal statement. Get as personal as you think is appropriate. Share your struggles, share what your life has been like, share what the turning point in your life was that made you realize you wanted to go to law school. Talk about what you want to do with your law degree. Talk about why it will mean so much to you to have a law degree. There's so many different ways, and I've put a link for you on the Student Resources website along with this video that is just a basic article about how you should write and what should you include in a personal statement. But keep in mind you want to get started on this early. So I would say give yourself at least 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 months before you start to plan to submit your applications to write your personal statement, because you're going to begin and you're going to have a first draft, but you should plan on writing multiple drafts and conducting multiple revisions, sharing it with your pre-law advisor, asking for input from other, writing instructors, etc. But you're going to have multiple people looking at this and giving you feedback. But it's a short essay about who you are and why you want to go to law school. So plan to write multiple drafts and revisions and start working on it as soon as you can. Now, everybody wants to know, what about LSAT scores? Do they matter? Yes, absolutely. It's one of the most critical measures that is going to be used in the application process and in determining whether or not you are eligible to be admitted to a particular law school. Some people even say that it is weighted even more than one's GPA. The better law schools, and I mean like Ivy League law schools like Harvard and Yale and even places like Stanford, they are going to demand high scores. So what is a good LSAT score? The answer, I'm going to give you the lawyerly answer, is it depends. What I mean is it depends on the law school to which you're applying. So that's when you are going to go back and you're going to use that tool I gave you a few slides back to run your numbers through the algorithm on the lsac.org website with your guide to all of the ABA approved schools. So you can see where the admissions fall in terms of LSAT scores and GPA scores, because every school is going to be different. Every school is going to be different. It can range anywhere from a 145 to a 170 and up, because the LSAT score is a minimum of 120 and a high of 180. And 180 is a perfect score. There are very few people I've ever met that have even come close to a 180, but it's possible. But the answer to what is a good LSAT score is going to depend on the school to which you are applying or to the schools that you wish to apply. So it can range, like I said, anywhere from 145 to 170 and over. Ivy League schools often require a score in the high 160s or at minimum a 170 or higher. So make sure you keep that in mind. Now, coming back to a question we talked about a few slides back, should you retake the LSAT? Yes, you can. If you didn't do as well as you wanted, you can take the exam, I think, up to 3 times in a single calendar year. But beware, because some schools may only look at your highest score. Some schools may look at all of your scores. Some may take an average of multiple scores if you've taken it multiple times. And some, like I said, are going to look at all the scores sort of, together and not necessarily only focus on the highest score. So if you decide that you want to retake the LSAT, just be aware of how that information is going to be used for your application. Now, everybody wants to know the cost of law school. It can be pricey. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the different parameters are for the costs of law school and what you can expect, so that you have your eyes wide open when you're going into this when it comes to how much is this going to cost. So the average cost of private law school for tuition and fees is $43,000 per year. Okay, that's $43,000 per year for a private law school for tuition and fees. Plus, on top of all that, you have to also think about living expenses. The average cost of a public in-state law school for tuition and fees is $26,000 a year. And again, you have to also add to that living expenses. The average cost of public out-of-state law schools for tuition and fees is about $39,000, almost $40,000 per year, plus living expenses. So again, we're talking about private law schools, public in-state law schools. For example, if you went someplace in California, if you're a California resident, or if you went to a public out-of-state school, let's say in Michigan. But we're looking at the average, mind you, average costs of private, public in-state, and public out-of-state law schools, the average yearly tuition, but that does not include living expenses. Now, some of the top 10 programs throughout the country, like Stanford, like Harvard, like those kinds of places, those are going to run you closer to about $60,000 per year. Now, there's been a lot of talk about school loans over these last number of years and what students are burdened with. So it's really important that you know what you're getting yourself into financially. If you have, the financial means to do so and it's not an issue, then, that's wonderful. But for many of you, myself included, I had to think about what it was going to cost me in terms of both private loans as well as federal loans to make the ends meet with regard to tuition and fees, and also help me out with living expenses. There was a Gallup poll that was done in 2018 in which 23% of law school graduates said that their education was worth the cost, and 20% said that their schooling prepared them well for postgraduate life. but that's 23%, 20% out of all the people that went to law school. I feel it did prepare me really well, but that's my own personal opinion. So I probably would be in that 23%. But eyes wide open, everyone, so that you know what it costs before you sign on for the next 3 years of your life. Now, the question I get a lot is, hey, Professor Glumac, what's law school really like? Well, I won't mince words. I have been known, to give it to you straight, and I will give it to you straight again here. The bottom line is law school is hard. It's hard. It was one of the hardest academic endeavors that I had ever undertaken. Law school requires time. And what I mean by that is we're talking about 3 years of your life where you are basically spending all your time every day eating, drinking, thinking, and dreaming about the law. Sure, you get some summer breaks, but still you're thinking about the next semester, and you're thinking about then the bar exam, and you're thinking about basically the law all the time. So it requires time, and it does take up a lot of your time. Another aspect of law school is that it requires commitment. Commitment means that you are agreeing or pledging to do something in the future, which means that you are committing to your studies and you're seeing them through to the end. And that's what law school requires. Commitment. It also requires a certain level of discipline and dedication. As I tell my students, there's no crying in law school. There's no crying in law school. It is not as warm and fuzzy or perhaps forgiving a place as your undergraduate experience might have been. Managing your studies, reading hundreds of pages of case law every night, being prepared for every single substantive course by briefing every single case that is required reading for that day's class, requires a level of discipline and dedication unlike anything you've experienced in undergrad. And I'm telling you that from personal experience. So this requires a discipline to stay on top of your studies, to manage your studies, to read everything you need to read, to be prepared as prepared can be for every class meeting. And this requires, like I said, discipline and dedication. It also requires rigor. What do I mean by rigor? Well, rigor is defined as the quality of being extremely thorough, exhaustive, or accurate. Everything you do has to be done with rigor, thoroughness, accuracy. So I tell a lot of my students when we're talking about cases or case law. The law can be unforgiving. It's unforgiving of mistakes. It's unforgiving of excuses. And so too can law school be, as unforgiving and as sort of, I don't want to say harsh, but rigorous. Being unprepared when you are called on in class is unacceptable, and so are excuses in law school. As I like to say, this sort of half-assed preparation, I kind of read the case, won't cut it in law school. So law school is not for the faint of heart, and you need to be prepared for that. I will tell you the truth, I've been through it myself. It scared the heck out of me the first couple of weeks, and then I got into my rhythm and I realized what was necessary to successfully navigate every class and my first year and my second all the way to graduation. But again, it requires rigorousness, thorough, exhaustive, and accurate dedication to everything that you do when you are in law school. Now, law school is not for everyone. I have met many a law student that decided that they were done after the first semester, and there is no shame in that. Sometimes you have to get there to decide it's not for you. It doesn't mean that if you really want to go that you can't go. It doesn't mean that, you may not be able, to be successful once you get into law school. But it might be that once you get there, you realize, wow, this was great in theory, but not so much in reality. And that's okay. Law school is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. So I'll just put that out there for those of you who might find yourself at some point in the future in law school thinking, wow, I don't think I'm really into this. There's no shame in any of that. So just keep that in mind. All right. So 6 questions to ask yourself. Why do you want to go to law school? What do you envision doing with your law degree? So you have an idea of sort of what your trajectory is. What is the job market like and what's it going to be like when you graduate? Can you get into a well-ranked law school? Because that's going to be really important in terms of where you're going to be able to get jobs afterwards, how well prepared you will be for the bar exam, etc. What is the cost benefit analysis? How much is it going to cost me and how much money am I going to be able to make to pay back those loans? And what will I be able to do with that degree that I want to do with my career? And finally, never underestimate the importance of a question like whether or not you should take some time off first. Sometimes it might be best to take some time off first, get a job working in a law firm, get a job working for a judge or working in a court, externing, doing something like that, be in and around the law in some way to see if it's really still something that you want to do, or just to gather yourself before you embark on this 3-year journey that for some people is extraordinarily rigorous and difficult and one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But, you can do some things to prepare yourself now. First and foremost, try to become the best writer you can. That's something that's going to be critically important in law school. Come take legal research and writing class with me. You can also take other courses in the political science department, such as judicial process. Take this as early as you can after you have completed your core classes. It's one of the foundational courses in our public law subfield and will give you some exposure to the American judicial system, how it works, how decision-making is undertaken by judges, and a lot of other critical information for those of you who are thinking of going to law school. You can also take other law-based courses at San Francisco State in the public law subfield, like Political Science 552, which is individual rights in the Constitution, or classes in other departments, like in criminal justice. For example, I teach criminal law, there's criminal procedure, I teach legal writing and research. Those are all law-based courses. History, philosophy also have some interesting law-based courses that focus on the theory of law, etc. Moreover, try to get some sort of experience with the law. Take a moot court class or join the moot court team. Find out if you can participate in a judicial internship program. Explore outside opportunities where you can volunteer in some capacity to work in and around the law. But most importantly, meet with a pre-law advisor as soon as humanly possible. Now, a few takeaways. The truth is, law school is hard to get into and hard to get through. We've talked about the process of just getting to the applications, and then you're waiting for answers. Once you're in, though, it can be difficult to get through. It's challenging, it's rigorous, it demands time and dedication and commitment and discipline. It can also be really expensive, very demanding, but if you are passionate about the law as I am, it can be an extraordinarily rewarding experience. So I will not discourage anyone who wants to try. So above all, make sure that you want to go to law school before you actually take that dive, all right? Now, as all lawyers, I will issue a disclaimer. This workshop that I put on for you here is intended to be informational only. The advice that is contained within this workshop and within this video doesn't replace meeting with a pre-law advisor who in the political science department is Professor Martin Carcieri or Professor Nick Conway. So make sure you meet with one of them as soon as possible and you can get started on the process. All right, so I'm going to stop my share now and I'm going to thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoyed that instructional video. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me personally, or you can pose the questions to your pre-law advisors. Thanks for coming, and I hope that was helpful to everyone. Bye.